Everyone ignores the cat freezing in the park, until an old man does this. The biting wind whipped across the frozen expanse of Elmwood Park, stinging Walter Billingsley's cheeks as he jogged. At 82, his pace was more of a determined shuffle, but he adhered to his routine with the stubbornness that had characterized his entire life. Every morning, rain or shine, snow or sleet, Walter laced up his worn New Balance sneakers and made the mile-long loop around the park's perimeter. It was a ritual, a defiance against the creeping tendrils of age and the gnawing loneliness that had become his constant companion since his wife, Martha, had passed away 5 years prior. Elmwood Park, in the heart of Providence, Rhode Island, was his sanctuary. He'd known it since his childhood, played stickball on its fields as a boy, courted Martha on its benches beneath the shade of ancient oaks. Now, in the stark, skeletal grip of December, it was a different kind of beautiful. The trees, stripped bare of their leaves, stood like frosted sentinels against the pale winter sky. The pond, usually teeming with ducks and geese, was a sheet of ice, reflecting the weak sunlight with a cold, brittle gleam. Walter breathed deeply, the frigid air burning in his lungs. He adjusted his thick, woolen scarf, a gift from Martha years ago, and pulled his knit cap further down over his ears. He preferred the winter walks. The crowds were thinner, the noise muted, the world reduced to a palette of whites and grays. It suited his mood. He hadn't spoken to another soul in days, save for a brief exchange with the cashier at the grocery store. His 2 children, a son in California and a daughter in Texas, called occasionally, their voices strained with a mixture of concern and guilt, conversations punctuated by the unspoken question, "Dad, are you sure you're okay?" He was not okay, of course. He was achingly lonely. He missed Martha's laugh, her scent, the way she used to hum off-key while she cooked. He missed the easy companionship, the shared silences, the decades of intertwined lives. But he would never admit it, not to his children, not to anyone. He was a Billingsley, and Billingsleys were stoic, self-reliant, and fiercely independent. Or at least that's what he told himself. As he rounded the bend near the old bandstand, something caught his eye. A splash of color against the monochrome landscape. A huddled form beneath one of the park benches. The green paint chipped and faded with time. He slowed his pace, his breath catching in his throat. He initially thought that this might be one of the many homeless people in the park. He had sympathy for them. As he drew closer, he realized it wasn't a person. It was a cat. A large, ginger cat, its thick fur matted with snow, tied to the bench with a length of faded blue yarn. The cat was shivering violently, its head tucked down, its body pressed close to the cold metal of the bench. A small, empty food bowl lay overturned nearby, a testament to someone's half-hearted attempt at care. Walter stopped, his heart sinking. He crouched down, his old joints protesting with a chorus of creaks and pops. He reached out a gloved hand, hesitantly, and spoke in a soft voice. "Hey there, fella. You all right?" The cat lifted its head, slowly, revealing eyes of a startling, luminous green. They were filled with a mixture of fear and resignation. A low, mournful meow escaped its chapped lips. It was clear the cat was freezing, exhausted, and utterly abandoned. Walter felt a surge of anger, a rare and unfamiliar emotion these days. Who could do this? Who could leave a creature to suffer in this brutal cold? He looked around, scanning the deserted park, but there was no one in sight. The only witnesses were the silent trees and the unforgiving wind. He knew he couldn't leave the cat there. It would be dead by nightfall. But what was he supposed to do? He hadn't had a pet since his childhood dog, a scruffy terrier named Rusty, had passed away decades ago. He was old, set in his ways, living a life of quiet solitude. He didn't need the responsibility, the mess, the inevitable heartache. But the cat's eyes, those pleading green eyes, held him captive. He saw a reflection of his own loneliness, his own vulnerability, in that shivering, abandoned creature. And in that moment, something shifted within him. A flicker of warmth, a spark of compassion. reawakened in the frozen landscape of his heart. He carefully untied the yarn, his fingers fumbling with the knot. The cat didn't resist, as if it knew it was being rescued. Walter scooped the cat up in his arms, surprised by its weight. It felt surprisingly heavy, a solid mass of muscle and fur beneath his touch. The cat nestled against his chest, seeking warmth, its shivering subsiding slightly. "Don't you worry," Walter whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll take care of you. You're safe now." He started walking, slowly, cradling the cat close. The mile back to his small, two-bedroom house felt much longer than usual. His arms ached, his breath came in ragged gasps, but he didn't stop. He had a mission now, a purpose. He was no longer just an old man, shuffling through a lonely winter. He was a rescuer, a protector, a lifeline. And in the heart of that abandoned ginger cat, he had found something he hadn't realized he'd been searching for. A connection, a reason to care, a reason to keep going. The house was quiet, filled with the ghosts of memories. Martha's presence lingered in every room, in the floral wallpaper she'd chosen, in the crocheted doilies that adorned the furniture, in the faint scent of lavender that still clung to the air. Walter had kept everything exactly as she'd left it, a shrine to their shared life, a testament to his enduring love. He set the cat down gently on the kitchen floor, on a worn, braided rug in front of the radiator. The cat, still trembling, looked around with wide, wary eyes, taking in its new surroundings. Walter filled a bowl with water and another with some leftover chicken he'd roasted the day before. He placed them cautiously before the cat, who eyed the food with suspicion before tentatively lapping at the water. "There you go," Walter said softly. "Eat up. You must be starving." He watched as the cat slowly began to eat, its initial hesitation giving way to a ravenous hunger. Walter felt a sense of satisfaction, a small victory in the face of the day's bleak beginning. He spent the rest of the morning observing the cat, trying to assess its condition. It was clearly a male, a large, muscular tomcat, with thick orange fur that had seen better days. It had a few minor cuts and scrapes, but otherwise seemed to be in relatively good health, considering its ordeal. As the day wore on, the cat, whom Walter had tentatively named Rusty, after his childhood dog, began to relax. The shivering stopped, and he explored the kitchen with cautious curiosity, sniffing at the cabinets, rubbing against Walter's legs, and eventually, curling up on the rug by the radiator, falling into a deep, exhausted sleep. Walter found himself drawn to the cat's presence. He'd sit in his armchair, reading the newspaper or watching the muted television, and steal glances at Rusty, marveling at the simple grace of the animal. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed the presence of another living being in the house, the quiet companionship, the subtle sounds of life. The first few days were a learning curve. Walter had to relearn the basics of pet care, things he hadn't thought about in decades. He bought cat food, a litter box, a scratching post, and a few toys. He struggled with the litter box, spilling litter on the floor, and he winced at the sound of Rusty's claws sharpening on the scratching post, a sound that Martha would have hated. But he persevered, driven by a sense of responsibility and a growing affection for the ginger cat. Rusty, in turn, began to adapt to his new home. He followed Walter around the house, shadowing his every move, rubbing against his legs, purring loudly when petted. He slept at the foot of Walter's bed, a warm, comforting presence in the darkness. Walter found himself talking to Rusty, telling him about his day, about Martha, about his life. He knew it was silly, talking to a cat, but it felt good, a release of pent-up emotions, a way to fill the silence that had become so oppressive. One evening, as Walter was preparing dinner, Rusty jumped onto the kitchen counter, a blatant violation of the house rules. Walter, startled, instinctively reached out to shoo him away, but then he stopped. He looked at Rusty, at the way the cat was watching him, its green eyes bright with curiosity and a hint of mischief, and he couldn't help but smile. "You're a rascal, aren't you?" he said, his voice surprisingly light. "Just like your namesake." He scratched Rusty behind the ears, and the cat responded with a loud, rumbling purr. It was a small moment, a simple interaction, but it filled Walter with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He realized that Rusty wasn't just a pet. He was a companion, a friend, a confidant. He was family. He had to learn to live with a cat. As the weeks passed, Walter's routine began to change. He still took his morning walks in Elmwood Park, but now he hurried home, eager to see Rusty, to feed him, to spend time with him. He started talking to people again, to the neighbors he'd previously ignored, to the clerks at the pet store, sharing stories about Rusty's antics, his quirks, his endearing personality. He even called his children more often, not to complain about his loneliness, but to tell them about Rusty. His son, Mark, in California, was amused and slightly bewildered. "Akat, Dad? Really? You always said you were a dog person." "Well, I was," Walter admitted. "But Rusty, he's different. He's a good cat. He keeps me company." His daughter, Sarah, in Texas, was more perceptive. "I'm glad you have him, Dad," she said, her voice softening. "I know you've been lonely. It sounds like he's good for you." And he was. Rusty was more than just good for him, he was a lifeline. He had pulled Walter out of the depths of his grief and isolation, given him a reason to get out of bed in the morning, a reason to smile, a reason to live. But amidst the newfound joy and companionship, a shadow lurked. Walter was acutely aware of his own age, of the fragility of life. And as he watched Rusty, he began to notice subtle signs, small changes that worried him. Rusty was sleeping more, eating less, his movements becoming slower, more deliberate. He was no longer the energetic, playful cat he'd been when Walter first found him. He was getting old. Walter tried to ignore it, to push the thought to the back of his mind, but he couldn't shake the feeling of impending loss. He'd lost Martha, the love of his life, and the thought of losing Rusty, his newfound companion, was almost unbearable. He knew it was inevitable, that all living things eventually succumb to time, but that didn't make it any easier. The winter months melted into spring, and the stark beauty of Elmwood Park gave way to a riot of color. The trees, once bare and skeletal, were now bursting with vibrant green leaves. The pond, freed from its icy grip, teemed with life. Walter continued his morning walks, but now he often took Rusty with him, carrying him in a special pet carrier he'd purchased. Rusty, despite his age, seemed to enjoy the outings. He'd sit in the carrier, his head poking out, his green eyes taking in the sights and sounds of the park. He'd purr contentedly when Walter stopped to rest on a bench, soaking up the warm sunshine. These were precious moments, filled with a quiet joy, a shared appreciation for the simple beauty of the world. Walter would talk to Rusty, pointing out the birds, the squirrels, the blooming flowers. He'd tell him stories about Martha, about their life together, about the memories they'd made in this very park. He recalled a summer day. Martha had just bought a straw hat. They were sitting on the bench, laughing and chatting, and Martha's hat was blown away by the wind. Walter ran and finally caught the hat. Martha smiled so happily. Rusty, of course, didn't understand the words, but he seemed to sense the emotion behind them. He'd rub against Walter's hand, purring softly, offering a silent comfort, a gentle reassurance. Their bond deepened with each passing day. They were inseparable, two old souls finding solace in each other's company. Walter couldn't imagine his life without Rusty. The cat had become his shadow, his confidant, his reason for being. But the shadow of age continued to loom. Rusty's health was undeniably declining. He was losing weight, his fur becoming dull and patchy. He had trouble jumping, his movements stiff and labored. He spent most of his days sleeping, curled up in his favorite spot by the radiator, a faint, wheezing sound accompanying his breaths. Walter took him to the vet, a kind, compassionate woman named Dr. Evans. She examined Rusty carefully, her expression grave. She ran some tests, and the results confirmed Walter's worst fears. Rusty had kidney failure, a common ailment in older cats. It was irreversible, progressive, and ultimately fatal. Dr. Evans explained the situation to Walter with gentle honesty. She said there was no cure, but there were treatments that could manage the symptoms, improve Rusty's quality of life, and perhaps buy him some time. She prescribed medication, a special diet, and regular subcutaneous fluids to keep him hydrated. Walter listened intently, his heart heavy with dread. He asked all the right questions, meticulously noting the instructions, determined to do everything he could for Rusty. He was willing to spend whatever it took, to go to any lengths, to keep his beloved companion comfortable and pain-free. He returned home, his mind racing, his emotions a tangled mess of grief, fear, and a desperate, clinging hope. He looked at Rusty, sleeping peacefully by the radiator, and felt a wave of love so intense, so profound, that it brought tears to his eyes. He started the treatments immediately, meticulously following Dr. Evans' instructions. He administered the medication, carefully measuring the dosage, coaxing Rusty to swallow the pills. He prepared the special food, blending it into a soft, palatable mush. He learned how to administer the subcutaneous fluids, a daunting task at first, but one he mastered with practice and determination. It was a demanding regimen, requiring patience, dedication, and a constant vigilance. Walter's days revolved around Rusty's needs, his every waking moment focused on caring for his ailing companion. He monitored his food intake, his water consumption, his litter box habits, meticulously charting everything in a small notebook. He noticed that every time he gave Rusty fluids, he felt extremely guilty. Rusty hated it very much. It seems like I'm torturing him. But if I don't do this, Rusty will be even more uncomfortable. He talked to Rusty constantly, telling him how much he loved him, how grateful he was for his companionship. He stroked his fur, scratched behind his ears, and whispered words of encouragement, of comfort, of love. And Rusty, despite his declining health, responded. He'd purr weakly, nuzzle against Walter's hand, and look at him with those luminous green eyes, filled with a depth of affection that transcended words. He seemed to understand, to appreciate the care, the love, the unwavering devotion. There were good days and bad days. On good days, Rusty would eat a little more, show a flicker of his old playfulness, even attempt a clumsy jump onto the couch. On bad days, he'd refuse to eat, lie listlessly by the radiator, his breathing labored, his eyes dull with pain. Walter cherished the good. The bad days started to outnumber the good. Spring had fully blossomed, painting Elmwood Park in a vibrant tapestry of greens, blues, and yellows, but Walter found little joy in its beauty. His world had narrowed, his focus entirely consumed by Rusty's deteriorating condition. The medications seemed to be losing their effectiveness. The special diet did little to tempt Rusty's fading appetite, and even the subcutaneous fluids offered only temporary relief. Walter spent hours sitting by Rusty's side, stroking his thinning fur, whispering words of comfort, fighting back the tears that constantly threatened to spill over. He knew the end was near, and the realization was a crushing weight on his heart. He'd prepared himself for this intellectually, but emotionally he was utterly unprepared. One particularly difficult evening, Rusty refused to eat anything. He lay curled up in his bed, his body trembling, his breathing shallow and raspy. Walter tried everything, warming the food, adding broth, even offering him a small piece of tuna, Rusty's favorite treat. But nothing worked. Rusty simply turned his head away, his eyes closed, his body radiating an aura of exhaustion and resignation. Walter felt a wave of panic wash over him. He called Dr. Evans, his voice trembling with fear. She listened patiently, her tone calm and reassuring. She told him to bring Rusty in first thing in the morning, but she also gently prepared him for the possibility that there might not be much more she could do. That night, Walter didn't sleep. He stayed by Rusty's side, holding his paw, stroking his fur, whispering words of love and gratitude. He talked about Martha, about their life together, about the joy Rusty had brought him in his loneliness. He replayed all their precious memories together. He apologized for any mistakes he'd made, for any moments of impatience or frustration. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Walter knew. He looked at Rusty, at his still, frail body, and he saw the peace that had settled over him. The labored breathing had ceased. The trembling had stopped. Rusty was gone. Walter gently touched Rusty's head. It was still warm. He felt as if his heart had been ripped from his chest. The tears he'd been holding back finally flowed, a torrent of grief, loss, and a profound sense of emptiness. He sat there for a long time, cradling Rusty's body in his arms, unable to move, unable to comprehend the finality of it all. He eventually called Dr. Evans, his voice choked with emotion. She was kind and understanding, offering her condolences and making arrangements for Rusty's cremation. Walter insisted on a private cremation. He wanted to keep Rusty's ashes with him, a tangible reminder of his beloved companion. The following days were a blur of grief. Walter moved through the house like a ghost, haunted by Rusty's absence. Every corner, every room, held a memory, a reminder of the joy and companionship they'd shared. The silence was deafening, the emptiness unbearable. He mechanically went through the motions of daily life, eating, sleeping, taking his walks in Elmwood Park, but his heart wasn't in it. The park, once his sanctuary, now felt like a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. He avoided the bench where he'd found Rusty, the spot where their journey together had begun. It was too painful. His children called, offering their condolences, urging him to come stay with them. But he refused. He couldn't leave his home, not yet. It was where he felt closest to Martha, and now to Rusty. It was where their memories resided, where their spirits lingered. He spent hours looking at photographs of Rusty, tracing the outline of his face, remembering the feel of his fur, the sound of his purr. He talked to him, just as he had when he was alive, telling him how much he missed him, how empty his life felt without him. The cremation service was small and private, just Walter and Dr. Evans. He held the small wooden box containing Rusty's ashes, feeling the weight of it in his hands, a tangible representation of his loss. He thanked Dr. Evans for her kindness and compassion, for everything she'd done for Rusty. He returned home, clutching the box to his chest, feeling lost and adrift. He placed the box on the mantelpiece, next to Martha's urn, a silent testament to the two great loves of his life. He looked at the two urns, Martha, his wife, Rusty, his best friend. They both brought him happiness and joy, and they both left. He didn't know what to do. The pain was too huge. The weeks that followed were a slow, arduous climb out of the abyss of grief. Walter's children continued to call, offering support and encouragement. He started talking to them more openly, sharing his feelings, allowing them to comfort him. He realized that he wasn't alone, that his children, despite the distance, cared deeply about him. One day, his daughter, Sarah, flew in from Texas to stay with him for a week. It was a turning point. Sarah didn't try to force him to move on, to forget about Rusty. She simply listened, offered a shoulder to cry on, and helped him with the practical tasks that had become overwhelming. She helped him clean the house, organize Rusty's things, and donate some of his toys and supplies to a local animal shelter. She encouraged him to talk about Rusty, to share his memories, to celebrate the joy he'd brought into his life. One afternoon, Sarah suggested they visit Elmwood Park together. Walter hesitated, reluctant to face the place that held so many bittersweet memories. But Sarah gently persisted, reminding him that it was also a place of beauty, a place where he'd shared many happy moments with both Martha and Rusty. They walked slowly, hand in hand, along the familiar paths. Walter pointed out the places where he and Martha had courted, the bench where he'd found Rusty, the spots where they'd sat and enjoyed the sunshine. As they approached the bench where Rusty had been abandoned, Walter felt a familiar pang of sadness, but this time, it was tempered by a sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the time he'd had with Rusty, for the love and companionship they'd shared. He was grateful for the lessons Rusty had taught him, about resilience, about acceptance, about the enduring power of love. Sarah noticed a small, wooden plaque affixed to the bench, something that hadn't been there before. It was a simple inscription. In memory of Rusty, a beloved friend, found and loved in Elmwood Park. Walter stared at the plaque, his eyes welling up with tears. He didn't know who had put it there, but it didn't matter. It was a testament to Rusty's impact, a small but significant recognition of his existence. He touched other people's lives too. "Dad?" Sarah said softly, squeezing his hand. "He wasn't just yours." Walter nodded, unable to speak. He realized that Sarah was right. Rusty's story, his brief but meaningful life, had resonated with others. He had left a legacy, a small ripple of kindness and compassion in the world. In the following months, Walter began to heal. The grief didn't disappear entirely, but it lessened, becoming a dull ache rather than a searing pain. He started to find joy in the small things again, in the beauty of the park, in the warmth of the sun, in the kindness of strangers. He adopted a new routine. He continued his morning walks in Elmwood Park, often stopping at the bench with Rusty's plaque, leaving a small flower or a handful of birdseed in his memory. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter, spending time with the cats, offering them the same love and care he'd given to Rusty. He even started talking to people again, to the neighbors he'd previously ignored, to the other volunteers at the shelter. He shared his story about Rusty, and he listened to their stories, their own experiences with loss and love. He realized that he wasn't alone in his grief, that everyone carries their own burdens, their own sorrows, and he found solace in the shared humanity, in the connection that came from acknowledging the pain and celebrating the resilience of the human spirit. One crisp autumn morning, a year after Rusty's passing, Walter was walking in Elmwood Park. The leaves were turning, a kaleidoscope of reds, oranges, and yellows. The air was cool and invigorating. He reached the bench, the place where it all began. He sat down, closing his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. He remembered Rusty, his green eyes, his soft fur, his comforting purr. He remembered Martha, her smile, her laugh, her unwavering love. He felt a sense of peace, a quiet acceptance. He knew that grief never truly disappears, that it becomes a part of who we are, shaping our perspective, deepening our empathy. But he also knew that life goes on, that there is still beauty to be found, joy to be experienced, love to be shared. He opened his eyes and looked out at the park, at the trees, the pond, the people strolling along the paths. He saw a young couple walking hand in hand, a group of children playing tag, an elderly woman feeding the ducks. And he smiled. He smiled because he knew that even in the face of loss, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of connection, of companionship, of finding a reason to keep going. He smiled because he knew that Rusty, like Martha, would always be with him, in his heart, in his memories, in the enduring legacy of love they had left behind. He took out a photo of Rusty and Martha from his jacket pocket. He looked at the photo and put it back. He then continued his walk with a lighter step. He finally moved on,